Welcome, dear listeners, to our nocturnal journey through history. Tonight, we explore not the philosophical depths of human existence, but something equally intriguing, the culinary landscape of Wild West saloons. Beyond their reputation for fiery whiskey, dramatic confrontations, and questionable musical entertainment, these establishments offered sustenance of varying quality. Was the menu limited to the stereotypical beans and bacon, or did these frontier eateries harbor unexpected culinary treasures? Before we begin our historical feast, I invite you to like this video and subscribe if you find value in these historical explorations. I'm always curious about my global audience. Please share in the comments where you're listening from and your local time. Now, adjust your surroundings for optimal relaxation. Perhaps dim the lights and activate a fan for that gentle background white noise as we embark on tonight's historical journey. The most striking sensory experience upon entering a Wild West saloon wasn't visual or auditory, it was olfactory. Forget romanticized notions of appetizing aromas. The authentic bouquet assaulted your nostrils with an unmistakable frontier perfume, a complex melange of perspiring ranch hands, damp tobacco, stale beer, moisture-laden timber, unwashed equines, and if fortune smiled upon you, the faintest suggestion of culinary activity occurring somewhere in the rear. Certain establishments attempted to mask these aromas with floor-scattered sawdust or smoke thick enough to induce temporary amnesia. Others simply embraced their distinctive atmosphere. The air quality isn't our selling point, bartenders would quip while dispatching insects with cloths that hadn't experienced proper laundering since before Appomattox. Nevertheless, most saloons maintained some form of kitchen. Perhaps it was merely a rudimentary alcove with beans simmering over glowing coals. Or it might feature a curmudgeonly woman in a soot-blackened apron, stirring mysterious concoctions with an implement that doubled as a defensive weapon. Regardless of its form, food preparation occurred somewhere on the premises, and if its aroma managed to penetrate the miasma of sweat and spirits, you were halfway to your evening meal, assuming you could secure seating. The architectural layout of saloons bore little resemblance to contemporary dining establishments. There were no attentive servers or elegantly scripted menus, merely a few weathered tables, unsteady chairs, and one extended counter serving multiple purposes: dining surface, drinking station, and debate platform. Regular patrons might receive a terse inquiry, beans or stew, requiring an equally laconic response without visual acknowledgement. Newcomers endured scrutinizing gazes as staff assessed whether payment or unconsciousness would occur first. This unique dining experience revealed an essential truth. Saloon sustenance wasn't about gastronomic pleasure, but survival. You consumed what was available, rather than what you desired. Your dining companions were strangers who might either rob you or save your life in the near future. And if digestive distress followed your meal, well, that's precisely why whiskey was invented. In the hierarchy of frontier cuisine, beans reigned supreme not for their flavor, but for their practical virtues: affordability, durability, and resilience against apocalyptic events, gunfire exchanges, and cattle stampedes. The variety Pinto Black Navy was inconsequential. If it was dehydrated, marginally edible, and susceptible to prolonged boiling, it found its way into the communal pot. These legumes became the unsung heroes of saloon kitchens, served throughout the day to men who'd been estranged from proper vegetables since departing the Midwest. The preparation protocol was elegantly simple. Introduce beans to vessels, subject to 6 hours of questionable heat. Serve alongside salt pork and stale bread, accompanied by a facial expression conveying mild contrition. Adventurous cooks occasionally introduced refinements: lard, onions, perhaps chili powder, during moments of culinary ambition. In the frontier culinary landscape, flavor was considered an unnecessary luxury, and seasoning consisted primarily of whatever atmospheric particles infiltrated through open windows. Beans offered 3 qualities cowboys valued more than precious metals: heartiness, satiety, and predictability. They fueled extended cattle drives, sustained marathon card games, and provided mastication opportunities during lulls in piano performances or while awaiting the next impromptu defect. The sole disadvantage: digestive aftermath. A solitary cowboy consuming beans posed minimal concern. 10 cowboys in an enclosed space following bean consumption constituted a biological hazard. Historical accounts suggest certain confrontations originated not from verbal insults, but from silent olfactory offenses near heating appliances. Nevertheless, beans remained the most dependable menu item when meat supplies exhausted, when poultry escaped, and when the cook retained minimal cognitive function from prolonged whiskey vapor exposure. Beans remained constant and troubled, uncharred, unchanged. Some cowboys actually preferred them. They remained edible when cold, tolerated infinite reheating cycles, and occasionally functioned as emergency currency. One particularly resourceful individual, reportedly, acquired a horse in exchange for 3 pounds of salted beans and a solemn vow of perpetual absence. While saloon cuisine experienced variable quality, beans represented its foundation, the bedrock, the humble yet steady heartbeat of countless frontier meals. They inspired not affection but respect, which sometimes proved sufficient. If beans constituted the soul of Wild West gastronomy, salt pork served as its more viscous vertebral column, a slab of adipose tissue and protein so resilient it withstood meteorological disturbances, tavern altercations, and extended saddlebag confinement without textural deterioration. Salt pork wasn't bacon, though frontier denizens often pretended otherwise. It was porcine belly, heavily preserved and frequently smoked, stored in containers with sufficient saline solution to season an expansive oceanic body. The salt prevented decomposition while simultaneously challenging edibility. When properly prepared, salt pork achieved tolerability. Fried to a crisp finish, it offered flavor, fat, and a satisfying textural component that momentarily distracted from the canned origin of accompanying provisions. But when improperly executed, a frequent occurrence consumption resembled masticating salted footwear dipped in mechanical lubricant. Despite these challenges, salt pork maintained devoted enthusiasts. It traveled well, resisted culinary catastrophe, and introduced welcome salinity to even the most bland legume preparation, if nothing else, providing justification for increased whiskey consumption. Saloon cooks utilized every component. The fat became a universal frying medium. The rind found its way into stews, or became canine sustenance, or an initiation test for unsuspecting newcomers who quickly discovered the wisdom behind the bartender's warning to masticate deliberately or accept the consequences with dignity. Occasionally, salt pork exhibited suspicious characteristics, perhaps a greenish discoloration or questionable aromatic properties, but frontier culinary standards prioritized survival over freshness. The prevailing philosophy wasn't "is this recently prepared?" but rather "did the previous consumer survive?" If affirmative, one proceeded with cautious sampling. Salt pork demonstrated remarkable versatility. Cowboys treasured it like valuable cargo, and saloon cooks relied upon it when alternative protein sources became unavailable. While neither elegant nor healthful, in a landscape where 60 miles might separate hot meals, salt pork fulfilled essential requirements, and surviving its consumption conferred a certain frontier resilience. In the Wild West culinary hierarchy, stew functioned as the great equalizer, hot, vaguely meaty, and inherently suspicious. Nearly every saloon offered some variation, regardless of kitchen quality. Why? Because stew provided the perfect disguise for whatever miscellaneous ingredients the cook had accumulated or couldn't legally identify. The foundational elements remained consistent: a container, heat, and optimism. Beginning with water and perhaps some legumes or tubers, one then incorporated whatever hadn't independently relocated. Beef, certainly. Rabbit, absolutely. Squirrel, indeed. Rattlesnake, assuming it had ceased defensive striking, it qualified for inclusion. One traveler reportedly discovered footwear components in his portion. Remarkably, he expressed no outrage. It constituted the most manageable textural element. Protein quality varied dramatically. Some stews contained tender bovine sections from local butchers. Others contained protein of undetermined origin. When the cook appeared nervous, coinciding with diminished canine populations, discretion dictated consuming around questionable segments while offering silent prayers. Vegetables, when available, underwent extreme thermal processing. Carrots reduced to orange remnants. Onions vanished entirely. Potatoes demonstrated greatest resilience, but eventually capitulated. The resulting concoction, a bubbling brownish-gray suspension, typically smelled more appealing than its appearance suggested and tasted better than anticipated, assuming adequate sodium content. Spices represented luxury. Most stews derive their distinctive qualities from residue on the cook's implements. Black pepper indicated an upscale establishment. Chili powder. Consider yourself warned. Respiratory passages would experience immediate and forceful clearing. Despite its mysterious composition, stew provided comfort to weary cowboys. It offered warmth, satiety, and remarkable extensibility through simple dilution. A single batch might serve numerous patrons or undergo multiple reheating cycles until achieving the consistency and personality of adhesive substance. Consumption wasn't motivated by flavor, but by availability, thermal properties, and limited alternatives, unless tobacco and regret constituted acceptable dietary options. The cardinal rule remained: never inquire about ingredients, because in frontier dining, ignorance wasn't merely blissful, it was essential. While premium cuts exceeded most cowboys' budgets, nearly every saloon offered some bread-adjacent product for stew absorption. These typically manifested in two forms: tender, flaky biscuits, representing culinary paradise when fresh, or hardtack, essentially breads, preserved, desiccated relative. Beginning with biscuits, when perfectly executed, a rare but magical occurrence, they emerged warm, buttery, and sufficiently flaky to convince consumers they'd stumbled into legitimate culinary establishments. Cooks capable of producing superior biscuits achieved local celebrity status. Some attributed success to animal fat, others to cultured dairy products, while some simply possessed fortunate hands and modest standards. These delicacies, paired ideally with beans or stew, useful for capturing remaining liquid. They typically emerged from cast iron vessels, baked over open flames, and arrived accompanied by suspicious butter, or, in more refined establishments, molasses. Then there was hardtack, a formidable creation of flour and water, baked until it achieved geological stability, originally crafted for military personnel. This frontier staple migrated westward owing to one remarkable attribute: immortality. While technically classified as food, it resided at the outermost boundary of that definition. Consuming hardtack demanded strategic approach. First, a thorough inspection for resident weevils, their presence considered less a defect than a protein supplement. Next came rehydration via stew, coffee, or whiskey process, requiring patience measured anywhere from brief minutes to geological epochs. Even after proper soaking, consumption remained challenging. One didn't merely eat hardtack so much as engage in culinary combat. Frontier dentists likely funded their establishments through the misfortunes of overconfident diners who challenged these wheat-based stone tablets. Yet both biscuits and hardtack fulfilled essential culinary functions. Their economic production, portability, and caloric density suited frontier nutritional priorities perfectly. In an environment where sustenance outweighed sensory experience, functionality trumped flavor. Encountering fresh biscuits in a dusty establishment warranted profound gratitude. Receiving a hardtack disc of considerable density offered, at minimum, a memorable anecdote and potentially a dental modification. If contemporary coffee seems potent, consider its frontier predecessor, a beverage so forceful it didn't merely dispel drowsiness, but established ocular dominance, contests with its consumer. Western coffee emphasized survival rather than sensory delight. No careful origin selection, artisanal filtration, or botanical milk embellishments existed here, just roughly processed beans deposited into heated vessels until the liquid achieved both sentience and opacity. The preparation methodology maintained elegant simplicity. Combine water with coffee in quantities determined by temperament and desperation. Apply excessive thermal energy. Forego filtration. Accept the outcome with stoic resignation. The resulting concoction dense, profoundly dark, and aromatic, with notes of combusted ambition delivered memorable sensory impact. The final portion frequently contained more solid than liquid components, providing simultaneous stimulation and digestive assistance. Despite these characteristics, frontier inhabitants developed genuine appreciation. Coffee provided thermal comfort during frigid mornings, consciousness during nocturnal vigilance, and masked both hangover symptoms and questionable cuisine. It served simultaneously as fuel, comfort, and penance, delivered in simple metallic vessels. While not universal in saloon offerings unless kitchen facilities existed, when available it arrived, scalding, likely aged, and potent enough for industrial applications. One cowhand memorably described it as comparable to experiencing equine aggression in liquid form, yet noticeably absent when unavailable. Those with aspirational tendencies might incorporate sugar or preserved dairy. Most simply acknowledged its dominance with facial expressions of respectful distress. Establishments maintaining continuous thermal application throughout operating hours produced remarkably concentrated results, viscous as industrial adhesive and twice as temperamental. Some proprietors economize it by reusing grounds, yielding beverages embodying disillusionment and remorse, yet still fulfilling their essential function. In the frontier paradigm, coffee consumption prioritized vitality maintenance over gustatory pleasure. Within Western culinary economy, meat transcended mere nutrition to function as economic instrument, status indicator, and occasional courage assessment. Financial capacity might permit ordering steak, though outcomes depended entirely on fortune, chronology, and whether culinary staff harbored personal animosity. While theoretically luxurious, steak often manifested as leathery, excessively cooked bovine segments, prepared in rendered fat, subjugated through thermal aggression, and presented without ornamentation. Requesting specific preparation temperatures frequently elicited prolonged, challenging stares from kitchen personnel. When fresh provisions proved unavailable, common circumstantial alternative protein sources emerged. Desiccated jerky, preserved bison, occasional venison, or wild boar when hunting expeditions succeeded. Success in this context indicated both accurate marksmanship and efficient carcass retrieval before scavenger intervention. Remote settlements displayed particular protein creativity: cereine stew, serpent roasts, or leopard prepared with minimal seasoning. Any ambulatory creature not serving equestrian transportation purposes qualified for culinary consideration. Occasionally, protein arrived without taxonomic identification, a circumstance warranting silent consumption and minimal inquiry. Encountering extended mastication requirements or discovering mammalian facial structures suggested appropriate whiskey application, solemn acknowledgement, and philosophical acceptance. Aged provisions presented additional challenges. Prepares removed compromised sections, applied gravy liberally, and described the remainder as matured. Autonomous movement upon physical contact entitled diners to express mild surprise, but nothing further. Nevertheless, when ingredients maintained freshness and prepares maintained sobriety, genuine culinary achievement sometimes occurred. Properly prepared beef, complemented by ovum and bread, accompaniment a combination, justifying survival through interpersonal armed conflicts. More typically, one consumed available provisions with the modest hope they wouldn't reciprocate. Dessert within frontier establishments represented not deliberate menu planning, but fortuitous circumstance, the convergence of surplus ingredients and momentary culinary benevolence. If one reliable sweet offering existed, cornbread claimed this distinction. Crafted from simple components, ground maize, liquid, rendered fat, and occasionally leavening agents when memory permitted. Cornbread demonstrated remarkable versatility within frontier cuisine. Preparation methods included conventional baking, skillet frying, or direct addition to simmering stew when circumstances demanded efficiency or permitted indolence. Unaccompanied, it presented dry, fragmentary texture with variable sweetness depending on preparation. Ideally consumed immediately after creation, a timing rarely achieved in practice. More commonly, patrons received segments exposed to ambient heat since dawn. This sticky syrup was the unsung hero of Western deserts, a simple luxury that elevated dry, crumbly bread into something approaching decadence. It served as the cowboy's frosting, the outlaw's sweet consolation, the gambler's final pleasure before fortune abandoned him at the card table. Molasses possessed practical virtues: to affordability, remarkable shelf stability in punishing heat, and the miraculous ability to disguise the shortcomings of even the most questionable baked goods. A saloon boasting a barrel of this liquid treasure immediately earned distinction. One that served it warmed merited the same reverence modern diners reserve for Michelin-starred establishments. The more ambitious saloon cooks elevated this simple pairing further, ladling molasses over skillet hot cornbread and incorporating a judicious pinch of salt or spice. While it wouldn't qualify as proper cake by Eastern standards, to the frontier, palate accustomed to the monotonous chew of jerky and the dental warfare of hardtack, this modest creation offered transcendent pleasure. Cornbread with molasses emerged as the quintessential frontier dessert, economical, substantial, sufficiently sweet to soothe nerves frayed by treacherous trails or narrowly won poker hands. It required no elaborate garnishes or delicate preparation, just honest ingredients, providing uncomplicated satisfaction, and occasional gunfire. Such humble sweetness provided necessary perspective, a gentle reminder that the frontier wasn't exclusively populated by mortal dangers. Should you find yourself entering a saloon before midday, preferably upright, sober, and without visible injuries, you might encounter the rarest of frontier culinary offerings: eggs and chicken. Such a breakfast signaled either extraordinary good fortune or potential catastrophe. Consider first the eggs. Fresh eggs in the Wild West represented currency more precious than gold, similarly scarce, but considerably more fragile. Chicken husbandry presented numerous challenges. The birds proved temperamental, prone to wandering, and irresistible targets for theft, consumption, or predation. A saloon offering eggs necessarily maintained, either on-premises poultry, reliable local suppliers, or clandestine procurement networks extending to neighboring settlements. The variety of available eggs remained subject to circumstance, and availability, chicken eggs being ideal but not guaranteed. Seasoned frontier diners developed tactical wisdom. Order eggs without excessive inquiry regarding their origin. What arrived on your plate reflected a complex equation involving the cook's disposition and the egg's chronological journey. Some appeared scrambled, others fried until yolks achieved leather-like consistency. When an egg exhibited independent movement upon plating, chicken, while theoretically featured on menus, manifested infrequently. Menu promises of fried chicken typically yielded a particularly antagonistic specimens, skeletal and subjected to lard-based cooking until flavor surrendered completely. Despite these shortcomings, chicken offered precious variety in a culinary landscape dominated by beans and beef. Grateful diners accepted portions ranging from improbably small drumsticks to substantial quarters roasted over open flames. Occasional feathers appearing in accompanying gravy were acknowledged as authentication rather than oversight. Breakfast, featuring eggs and chicken, functioned as status signifiers for discerning establishments. Such offerings announced culinary ambition beyond canned and preserved fare. Successfully executed eggs served warm, chicken retaining minimal moisture. These meals generated weeks of appreciative recollection. When resulting in digestive distress, diners philosophically accepted such outcomes as the frontier's method of maintaining humility. Nevertheless, egg breakfasts carried psychological significance beyond nutrition. They represented optimism, new beginnings, and civilization's fragile foothold. Encountering cheese in frontier establishments required both specific knowledge and considerable courage. Unlike modern dairy products, saloon cheese arrived without standardization, refrigeration, or often proper identification. Local production typically involved individuals whose cheese-making credentials derived from distant memories of half-understood processes. Frontier cheese manifested primarily in two distinctive varieties: unnaturally firm yellow specimens, exhibiting suspicious perspiration, or friable, crumbly masses, emitting olfactory challenges, without reliable refrigeration accepting unusually cold seasons, or establishments with fortuitous proximity to natural caves cheese, inevitably developed pronounced personality. Taxonomic classification remained speculative, vaguely cheddar-adjacent, approximately Swiss-inspired, or simply amorphous dairy experiments, seasoned liberally with salt. When consumption produced audible protests from the cheese itself, diners maintained discreet silence regarding this phenomenon. It provided welcome counterbalance to prevailing saltiness, while offering concentrated protein between physical altercations. Creative applications included melting over beans or incorporating into cornbread. Assuming kitchen personnel possessed both inclination and rudimentary culinary imagination, vigilance remained essential. Unscrupulous establishments occasionally substituted questionable alternatives, repurposed butter, experiencing evolutionary transitions, or hastily solidified milk pressed into approximate shapes and disguised with pepper. One particularly candid merchant documented purchasing Nevada cheese possessing organoleptic properties comparable to boiled footwear with structural integrity. Nevertheless, he consumed the entire portion, acknowledging the fundamental principle that even substandard cheese remained superior to its absence. Within frontier settlements, cheese availability signified meaningful achievement of connections to agricultural enterprises, or at minimum, access to unappropriated cattle. Cheese represented not culinary refinement, but civilizational aspiration in communities where personal hygiene frequently involved mineral abrasives rather than water. Confronted with cheese of dubious appearance, frontier diners conducted rudimentary inspection, applied tentative tactile assessment, perhaps performed cautious olfactory evaluation, then consumed it regardless. In the untamed territories, mealtime inherently involved calculated risk. Any substance capable of vinegar immersion and extended storage inevitably appeared on frontier saloon tables. Pickling represented not culinary preference but existential strategy. Before refrigeration technology, saloon kitchens relied upon acidification to prevent inventory from achieving autonomous mobility. Vegetables, eggs, fruits, and various protein sources all submitted to vinegar's preservative powers, establishing the ubiquitous presence of pickled everything. Cucumber pickles, the archetypal preservation, success offered, textural contrast, assertive flavor, and variable coloration. They functioned variously as side dishes, whiskey accompaniments, or diversionary mastication between questionable decisions. Quality ranged dramatically. Optimal specimens featured fresh ingredients and thoughtful seasoning, while less fortunate versions evoked meteorological disappointment and emotional despair. Pickled eggs achieved particular prominence in frontier culinary tradition. Suspended in cloudy brine within glass vessels, typically positioned adjacent to whiskey reserves. These transformed OVA presented ghostly appearance and distinctive textural properties. They inspired polarized opinions. Certain cowboys considered them essential, portable nutrition with reasonable digestive outcomes, while others expressed profoundly contrary perspectives. Pickled onions gained particular popularity within mining communities. Their assertive pungency and sharp flavor profile provided sufficient aromatic intensity to discourage unwanted conversation while enabling communication, despite significant downwind livestock presence. Even preserved fruits occasionally appeared, dried peaches or pears subjected to sweet brine immersion, creating culinary curiosities that defied conventional categorization. Neither proper dessert nor standard accompaniment, these offerings represented preserved optimism in liquid form. Pickled provisions offered practical operational advantages. Establishments maintained inventory for extended periods, months or years, without spoilage concerns. In environments where unpreserved meat deteriorated more rapidly than gambling fortunes, such stability proved invaluable. Candid assessment reveals qualitative inconsistency within pickled offerings. Inadequate sealing methods, experimental preservation approaches, or questionable ingredient selection occasionally produced results, inspiring mutual apprehension between consumer and consumed. Historical accounts, potentially embellished, describe unfortunate encounters with pickled sausages containing unexpected structural elements or bearing inscriptions suggesting profound taxonomic uncertainty. Nevertheless, preserved provisions represented essential frontier cuisine components, appropriately saline, assertively acidic, and surprisingly satisfying within their context. Consumption motivation prioritized survival above sensory pleasure. Their primary virtue remained straightforward. They generally wouldn't precipitate immediate mortality. When conventional sustenance proved inaccessible, kitchen facilities inoperative, or stew exhibiting signs of potential animation, frontier inhabitants invariably turned toward the saloon's most reliable offering, whiskey. It maintained perpetual availability, required no preparation, and consumed in sufficient quantity induced convenient amnesia regarding recent culinary misadventures involving unidentified small mammals. Frontier whiskey bore minimal resemblance to contemporary spirits. It lacked aging protocols, production standards, or safety considerations. Distilled from corn, rye, or whatever fermentable materials presented themselves. Production occurred in improvised facilities ranging from back rooms to agricultural structures to repurposed bathing receptacles. The resulting beverage possessed industrial applications beyond consumption, wound sterilization, paint removal, and conflict instigation. Colorful nomenclature reflected its distinctive properties: rot gut, chain lightning, or simply lunch. When conventional food sources proved compromised or unpalatable, frontier inhabitants consumed caloric requirements through sequential burning libations. Whiskey transcended mere intoxicant status, functioning as essential survival equipment, providing temporary relief from physical discomfort, emotional distress, skeletal injuries, and questionable dietary choices. A single shot of whiskey before facing an opponent in a duel liquid courage. 2 more after the smoke cleared, regardless of outcome. And perhaps 3 additional servings, while contemplating whether that burning sensation in your side was merely bruised ribs or something requiring more serious attention. Saloons frequently offered whiskey meal specials, a glass of spirits, accompanied by a modest portion of beans or a dense biscuit. These accompaniments served not as culinary complements, but rather as strategic ballast, preventing immediate inebriation. Some patrons developed peculiar preferences, such as whiskey containing a suspended pickled eggan arrangement, simultaneously addressing both hydration and protein requirements while challenging conventional gastronomic boundaries. Beyond mere consumption, whiskey functioned as social currency. One purchased it to cultivate alliances, initiate confrontations, and occasionally to express contrition following both activities. A saloon's reputation could be assessed by the efficiency with which its spirits rendered patrons horizontally incapacitated. Regarding quality standards, inquiries proved inadvisable. Certain establishments offered distillations resembling liquid combustion, served by proprietors whose facial expressions conveyed comprehensive product warnings more effectively than verbal advisories. The establishment's cook represented an entirely distinct narrative. These culinary innovators operated with severely restricted ingredient inventories and rudimentary equipment. They embraced thermal extremes and atmospheric particulates, interpreted criticism as seasoning suggestions, and adhered to a singular operational principle. Dissatisfied patrons were directed either toward the exit or additional whiskey consumption. Consequently, regardless of whether these individuals functioned as nutritional benefactors or gastrointestinal adversaries, prudent patrons acknowledged them, respectfully recognizing that within frontier establishments, these individuals controlled both immediate physiological welfare and subsequent digestive outcomes through their oil-stained, remarkably capable hands. Having now metaphorically traversed the threshold, evaluated the simmering contents, and confronted preserved ovum specimens in clouded preservation vessels, we confront the essential inquiry: would contemporary individuals willingly consume Wild West saloon fare? Candid assessment suggests modern palates might experience significant adjustment difficulties. The legumes offered minimal complexity, protein selections represented probabilistic uncertainty, and stew compositions defied precise categorization. Successful consumption required substantial dental fortitude, exceptional digestive resilience, and appetite intensified by extended equestrian travel across arid landscapes with respiratory passages saturated with environmental particulates. Yet this contextual understanding proves crucial for frontier inhabitants, including cattle herders, mineral extractors, recreational gamblers, and societal nonconformists. Saloon sustenance transcended culinary sophistication or aesthetic presentation. It represented essential metabolic fuel, caloric intake, thermal comfort, nutritional respite between armed confrontations, transportation disruptions, or another evening's accommodation alongside quadrupedal companions bearing names suggesting retrospective reconsideration. Fundamentally, it enabled survival. Inquiries regarding protein sourcing remained diplomatically suppressed. Complaints concerning biscuit structural integrity, resembling calcium-based mineral formations, were considered inappropriate. One simply assumed the designated seating position, consumed provided sustenance, and facilitated digestion with liquid accompanied by sufficient ethanol concentration to neutralize microbial threats, or, at minimum, render their presence inconsequential. Occasions when culinary offerings achieved genuine quality: freshly prepared legumes, non-antagonistic coffee, cornbread enhanced with molasses inclusion, were regarded with disproportionate appreciation, bordering on reverence. Therefore, would contemporary individuals transported to this historical context consume such offerings? Affirmative. Beyond mere consumption, genuine appreciation would develop. Vessel contents would be thoroughly extracted, remaining sauce components collected with bread fragments, and additional portions requested using currency retaining olfactory evidence of explosive compounds and equine perspiration. One would engage in communal amusement with unfamiliar individuals, express culinary criticism, participate in whiskey-facilitated celebrations, and occasionally conclude evenings with unexpected dessert offerings accompanied by narratives meriting subsequent repetition. Because, while saloon sustenance lacked sophistication, characterized instead by substantial oil content, particulate residue, and authenticity within an environment where civilization's boundaries remained indistinct, such qualities proved entirely sufficient. Centuries before dermal illustrations adorned contemporary physiques in commercial establishments featuring electrical implements, permanent bodily markings represented significantly more ancient practices, created not for aesthetic enhancement, but for purposes encompassing mysticism, significance, and existence perpetuation. Consider epochs predating urban development, theological nomenclature, and when humanity maintained profound physical and spiritual connection with fundamental existence. Consider c. the preserved human remains discovered in 1991 within glacial formations between Austrian and Italian territories. His remarkably preserved corpse predated both Egyptian pyramidal structures and Neolithic British monoliths by millennia, yet, across his desiccated dermal surfaces, researchers identified surprisingly contemporary modifications, permanent markings. 61 distinct markings, specifically. These decorations lacked ornamental complexity or zoological representation. Instead, featuring carbon-based, linear, and circular patterns distributed along vertebral alignment, posterior knee surfaces, and circumferentially around ankle regions. Particularly remarkable, CZ's marking locations correspond precisely with established therapeutic pressure points. Could these represent primitive pain management methodology, ancestral medicinal practice, or perhaps transcendental endurance demonstration physically manifested? Definitive conclusions remain elusive. However, one certainty emerges. Even during Paleolithic existence, humans deliberately modified their physical forms with intentional purpose. CI represents merely one historical example. Within ancient Egyptian civilization, permanent bodily markings appeared predominantly among female populations, including religious functionaries and performance specialists. These designs transcended contemporary ornamental butterflies or romantic commemorations, instead featuring symbolic configurations positioned strategically across abdominal regions, upper leg surfaces, and thoracic areas. Academic interpretation suggests these markings provided protection during reproductive processes, enhanced fertility manifestation, or repelled malevolent spiritual entities, essentially functioning as metaphysical protection, physically incorporated within the bearer. Further south within Nubian territories, archaeological excavations revealed preserved remains featuring zoomorphic representations permanently applied to extremities, including bovine creatures and reptilian predators, symbolizing authority and persistence. Throughout these ancient societies, permanent bodily markings transcended rebellious expression. They represented reverence, resilience, and ceremonial significance. Their meaning derived not exclusively from pigmentation, but through associated discomfort, permanence, and belief systems. Thus, when encountering extensively marked individuals during routine activities, recognize their participation within traditions originating not within contemporary commercial establishments, but rather within glacial environments, desert landscapes, and across centuries of sacred silence from forgotten millennia. Should one characterize permanent bodily markings as merely provocative accessories or authority rejection indicators? Expressing such perspectives before Polynesian leadership figures would likely precipitate profound conversational cessation. Within Polynesian cultural contexts, such markings transcended optional decoration. They embodied sacred significance. Indeed, the etymological origin of tattoo derives from the Tahitian linguistic term taitau, signifying percussive action, precisely reflecting implementation methodology. Osseous implements, submerged within carbonaceous materials, rhythmically introduced beneath epidermis using wooden striking implements, each percussion resonating with centuries of cultural continuity. While Indian subcontinent regions maintain greater recognition for temporary botanical pigmentation applications during matrimonial ceremonies and cultural observations, these territories additionally maintain extensive histories regarding permanent bodily modifications among indigenous populations, including Baigagond and Santhal communities. Such markings simultaneously represented ornamentation and protective functions. Female community members received symbolic representations of fertility, resilience, or spiritual devotion, not through capricious decision-making, but rather through deeply established traditions, transmitted across generational boundaries. These markings transcended mere aesthetic enhancement. They functioned as spiritual adornment, representing possessions immune from theft and transcending economic limitations. Japanese historical contexts present increased complexity during early developmental periods, particularly Jomon epochs. Bodily markings potentially carried spiritual significance, possibly denoting social position or supernatural protection. However, as Japanese society developed increasingly structured organizational systems, particularly during Edo chronological periods, permanent bodily marking practices developed alternative associations. Initially, such markings represented punitive measures. Offenders received facial or extremity markings, indicating specific transgressions and geographical origins, permanently identifying them as untrustworthy community members. Consider the societal implications of entering unfamiliar communities where residents immediately recognized personal transgressions through visual assessment. Subsequently, fascinating cultural developments emerged. Countercultural adaptation, societal marginalized populations, including emergency responders, manual laborers, and eventually organized criminal syndicates, adopted these markings not as shameful indicators, but as honorific symbols. They developed elaborate, full-body aesthetic programs called irizumi, frequently featuring mythological reptiles, aquatic creatures, and historical warrior representations. These represented artistic masterpieces, physically incorporated through hundreds of painful implementation hours. Each design communicated personal narratives, individual mythologies, permanently inscribed beneath societal judgment. Meanwhile, in Southeast Asia, Buddhist pilgrims embraced the sacred art of sak-yant, intricate geometric patterns and ancient Pali scriptures etched into skin, not merely as decoration, but as vessels of divine protection. These sacred markings came to life through the rhythmic tapping of monks wielding sharpened bamboo or meticulously crafted steel rods, each puncture accompanied by mystical chants that breathed spiritual energy into the ink. In these Eastern traditions, tattoos transcended simple categorization. They could be profoundly holy or deeply taboo, revered as sacred or marked as criminal. Their meaning was entirely contextual, shaped by the wearer's identity and intention. One truth remained constant across these diverse cultures. Skin served as a living canvas that never remained silent. It spoke volumes about power hierarchies, punishment endured, prayers offered, and pride embodied. As Christianity's influence spread throughout the crumbling Roman Empire, the ancient practice of tattooing, once a proud marker of identity or solemn badge of punishment, began to fade from Western consciousness. Why this dramatic shift? Because Christian doctrine reimagined the human form not as personal property, but as divine architecture, a temple of the Holy Spirit. And in the eyes of early church fathers, such temples were not meant to be adorned with worldly markings, regardless of their significance. Yet early Christian communities maintained a fascinating, contradictory relationship with the tattoo needle. Some faithful groups embraced permanent markings as profound declarations of spiritual devotion. Pilgrims who completed the arduous journey to Jerusalem would often commemorate their sacred pilgrimage by having small crosses tattooed onto their wrist, creating what amounted to a permanent spiritual passport. These weren't mere souvenirs, but testaments of faith, endurance, and divine protection, tangible proof they had walked in Christ's footsteps and survived to bear witness. Such practices, however, remained the exception rather than the rule. By the early medieval period, ecclesiastical authorities had crystallized their position. Bodily markings represented pagan rituals incompatible with Christian purity. Religious leaders repeatedly cited Leviticus 19:28 with its unambiguous prohibition, "You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks upon you. I am the Lord." This single scriptural verse effectively banished an entire artistic tradition across much of medieval Europe. Tattoos no longer signified identity or accomplishment, but instead became dangerous symbols of heathenism, witchcraft, and heretical beliefs, associations no one desired during the zealous fervor of the Inquisition. Throughout monasteries and Christian kingdoms, the ancient art of tattooing retreated into shadows, surviving only in whispered traditions and superstitious practices. Yet even during this period of intense suppression, the practice never completely vanished. In remote regions of the Byzantine Empire, certain Christian communities continued religious tattooing traditions, marking hands and arms with small crosses that served dual purposes: spiritual protection and practical identification that could prevent capture into Islamic slavery. In Ethiopia, Coptic Christians maintained unbroken tattoo traditions, marking young believers with sacred symbols as integral components of their spiritual identity and religious practices. Perhaps most surprisingly, among the battle-hardened crusaders who marched eastward to reclaim the Holy Land, tattoos experienced a quiet renaissance. Knights would sometimes have small crosses etched into their skin, not merely as spiritual talismans, but as practical insurance policies. Should they fall in battle far from home, these permanent marks would ensure proper Christian burial, their faith remaining visible even in death. So while medieval Western authorities attempted to eradicate tattooing as a legitimate art form, they never fully succeeded. The ancient practice simply went underground, preserving itself in monastery cells, along pilgrim routes, and within desert churches, waiting patiently like a buried relic for its inevitable rediscovery. As the age of exploration unfolded, and European vessels began carving paths through uncharted waters, tattoos discovered an entirely new canvas: the weather-beaten bodies of sailors. These weren't refined court artists or tribal shamans wielding the needle, but rough men whose skin had been toughened by salt spray and whose lives were governed by superstition. They adorned their bodies with symbols that spoke to their reality, anchors representing stability in a constantly shifting world. mermaids embodying the mysterious allure of the sea, and crucifixes offering protection against the countless dangers lurking beneath the waves. But how exactly did tattooing return to European consciousness after centuries of religious suppression? The credit largely belongs to Captain James Cook's revolutionary voyages in the 18th century. When his crews encountered Polynesian societies, they discovered entire cultures where elaborate body markings signified status, accomplishment, and spiritual power. Fascinated by these living canvases, many sailors voluntarily submitted themselves to traditional tattooing methods, partly to honor the cultures they encountered, but also, if we're being honest, to acquire tangible proof they had ventured into exotic realms few Europeans had witnessed. Returning to European ports with these permanent souvenirs wasn't merely fashionably functioned as a visual resume, a living record documenting voyages survived and distant shores explored. Soon, tattoos evolved into an unofficial uniform among the seafaring class. Each design, laden with practical meaning and superstitious significance, an anchor on the forearm symbolized steadfastness amid chaos. A pig and rooster tattooed on the feet were believed to prevent drowning, based on the practical observation that these animals were kept in wooden crates that remained buoyant during shipwrecks. Some sailors had holdfast inscribed across their knuckles, believing it would magically strengthen their grip when battling treacherous seas and tangled rigging. Religious iconography abounded, as well crosses adorning backs, the Virgin Mary positioned protectively over hearts. These weren't mere decorations, but spiritual armor, an additional layer of divine protection when facing the ocean's merciless fury. As these marked sailors filtered back into European and American port cities, tattoo culture gradually spread beyond ship's knot to aristocratic drawing rooms, but to society's margins, dockworkers, soldiers, prisoners, and vagabonds. Tattoos evolved into a visual language spoken primarily by the working class, the wanderers, and those who lived dangerously. Yet even as tattoos gained this rougher association, they retained profound personal significance. During the American Civil War, soldiers began tattooing their names and regimental information on their bodiza. Grim but practical preparation ensuring identification should they fall in battle. These markings served as crude insurance policies in an era before standardized identification tags. So while monarchs and clergy maintained their disdain for tattooed skin, the very men who charted the world's boundaries embraced these permanent markings with fierce pride. For these seafarers and soldiers, each inked symbol represented a personal narrative, a battle scar, a protective charm, or a silent prayer. And when life ended, whether beneath crashing waves or amid cannon fire, these markings might remain as the final testament to their identity, the last remnants of a story that would otherwise vanish without trace. As the 19th and 20th centuries unfolded, tattoos underwent a profound transformation. No longer confined to sacred temples or tribal ceremonies, they evolved into powerful symbols of defiance nowhere more evident than within prison walls. Behind bars, tattoos developed their own visceral language, etched with makeshift tools and speaking volumes to those who understood their code. Consider the Soviet gulags, where, beneath the crushing weight of oppression, an intricate tattoo culture flourished in secret. These weren't mere decorations, but living biographies, hierarchical, symbolic, and deadly serious. A star adorning the shoulders commanded immediate respect. Barbed wire encircling the neck marked you as someone serving life, never to taste freedom again. A cathedral with ornate domes across your chest. Each dome meticulously tallied a sentence served. These markings chronicled crimes, rank, and defiance with unflinching honesty. But there was a price for authenticity where, a symbol you hadn't earned, and fellow inmates might remove it with a blade, along with the skin it adorned. In Japan, the Yakuza elevated tattooing to an art of extraordinary complexity. They transformed Irizumi ones, used as punishment, to badges of honor and belonging. Full-body masterpieces, depicting sinuous dragons, swimming koi, and battle-ready samurai warriors, covered them from shoulders to ankles, often concealed beneath impeccable business attire. These weren't impulsive decisions, but profound commitments, excruciatingly painful, prohibitively expensive, and absolutely permanent. Western prisons developed their own rich, symbolic language. In American correctional facilities, a solitary teardrop beneath the eye might reveal a murderer, or, in some traditions, mark the loss of someone beloved. Cobwebs spreading across elbows silently testified to years lost behind bars. Dots, numbers, and acronyms tattooed across knuckles and forearms created entire cryptic identities, visible to guards, but immediately legible to those fluent in this shadow language. The creation process itself reflected prison ingenuity, contraband, sewing needles, straightened paper clips, and ballpoint pens melted down to extract precious ink. There was no comfort in the application, no sterile environment, just raw pain and profound meaning. For inmates, these marks transcended art. They established identity, signaled allegiance, or served as warnings. Beyond prison walls, these same tattoos often became permanent stigmas, branding their bearers as dangerous, untouchable, beyond society's redemption. Yet for those who wore them, ink represented perhaps the only constant in their lives, the sole possession that couldn't be confiscated in a system designed to strip away everything else. In this context, tattoos weren't fashion statements, but essential tools of survival. As the 20th century progressed, tattoos completed their remarkable journey from sacred symbols and outlaw codes to emblems of mainstream rebellion. The Church's ancient view of tattoos as marks of sin gradually gave way to modern society's interpretation. Symbols of personal freedom and distinctive coolness. In the early 1900s, fully tattooed performers still drew gasps in circus sideshows. Tattooed ladies and illustrated men charged admission as audiences marveled at their extensively decorated skin tobu, transformed into spectacle. But a significant shift began mid-century when World War II veterans returned home bearing simple, meaningful tattoos. Anchors, eagles, and hearts inscribed with "Mom" weren't theatrical displays, but intimate talismans, permanent reminders etched into skin of battles survived, brothers lost, and the thin line separating life from death. The counterculture movements of the 1960s and 70s propelled tattoos beyond their traditional blue-collar domains and onto the bodies of cultural revolutionaries. Rock stars, motorcycle clubs, and literary bohemians embraced ink as personal expression. Janis Joplin's delicate wrist bracelet tattoo became iconic. The Hells Angels transformed tattoos into visual manifestos of loyalty and identity. What had once been socially suspect became deliciously rebellious permanent. Declaration of independence from conventional norms. Tattoo establishments themselves underwent reinvention. No longer relegated to seedy backalley operations, they emerged as legitimate studios. pioneering artists like Lyle Tuttle, whose clientele included celebrities like Cher and members of the Rolling Stones, lovated tattooing from craft to fine art. Suddenly, tattoos transcended mere symbolism to become powerful, personal, political, and artistic statements. Yet social acceptance arrived gradually, even into the 1990s and early 2000s. Visible tattoos remained employment barriers in many fields. Job applications explicitly prohibited them, and tattoos still carried whispers of criminality, deviance, or recklessness, particularly for women, whose tattooed bodies faced heightened scrutiny and judgment. Nevertheless, cultural tides were turning. Tattoo-centered television shows captured public imagination. Celebrities proudly displayed elaborate sleeves, and tattoo conventions became mainstream cultural events. What had once existed as a marginal subculture had completed its remarkable transformation from rebellion to runway. Tattoos had reclaimed their place in the cultural mainstream. But power, especially wielded by a woman, rarely comes without consequence. As Queen Tamiris consolidated her rule over the Massagetæ, whispers of concern traveled across mountain ranges to the south. There, a formidable monarch watched with calculating interests Iris the Great, whose ambitions knew no boundaries. As steppe winds carried premonitions across the grasslands, Tamiris, daughter of warriors and leader of a fierce nomadic people, stood poised at the threshold of legend. While Tamiris maintained her dominion over the wind-swept steppes, a very different power was crystallizing to the south, methodical, imperial, unstoppable. Cyrus the Great, architect of the mighty Achaemenid Empire, had already subjugated Lydia in the west and magnificent Babylon in the south. His imperial standards now fluttered over vast deserts, towering mountains, and cosmopolitan cities where languages changed with each passing caravan. Yet Cyrus remained unsatisfied. Empire builders are rarely content, their gaze perpetually fixed on distant horizons. To Cyrus's strategic mind, the Massagetæ represented both threat and opportunity intertwined. Though not wealthy in gold or grand cities, they controlled crucial northeastern frontier territories, gateways to valuable lands, resources, and lucrative trade routes. More significantly, the Massagetæ possessed something no empire could safely ignore: fierce, uncompromising pride. And pride, in Cyrus's calculation, was something to be methodically bent or decisively broken. A master of political maneuvering, Cyrus understood that brute force wasn't always the optimal opening strategy. Renowned for his cunning, diplomatic finesse, and strategic deception, he opted for a more subtle approach, one that previous kings had employed to neutralize threats without bloodshed: a marriage alliance. According to ancient chroniclers, particularly Herodotus, Cyrus dispatched emissaries to Tamiris with a matrimonial proposition. On parchment, it appeared the perfect political union: the illustrious king of Persia and the formidable queen of the Massagetæ. Tamiris, however, possessed sharp political instincts. She immediately perceived the proposal for what it truly was: not a genuine offer of partnership or affection, but a calculated stratagem to absorb her people without military conflict. Her firm rejection reverberated through the opulent halls of Persepolis with unexpected force. With diplomatic pretenses exhausted, Cyrus pivoted to the language he understood best: warfare. He commanded his vast army to cross the Araxes River, the natural boundary separating Persian territories from Massagetæ lands. His intention was unmistakable: to seize through conquest what Tamiris had denied through diplomacy. Yet Tamiris was already marshaling her defenses. She intimately understood her advantages, the terrain, her people's lightning-fast horseback combat techniques, and crucially, she recognized Cyrus's deeper motivation. He wasn't merely pursuing territorial expansion. He sought to crush a woman who had dared defy him. The world's most powerful monarch had declared war, utterly unaware of the tempestuous fury he had awakened upon the steppes. Cyrus, the great brilliant strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed his superior tactics would overwhelm her. Having vanquished kings, demolished cities, and subjugated entire nations, he dismissed the Massagetæ as mere undisciplined nomads with swift horses and no permanent fortifications. He failed to recognize that he was confronting an adversary equally cunning and infinitely more determined. Tamiris had issued her warning with crystal clarity. After rejecting his marriage proposal, she delivered an unambiguous message: cross the Araxes River at your peril. Undeterred, Cyrus proceeded anyway, constructing a pontoon bridge to transport his formidable army into Massagetæ territory. Instead of immediate confrontation, Tamiris executed a strategic withdrawal, deliberately drawing Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar landscapes. The Persian forces discovered an apparently abandoned encampment, generously supplied with provisions and, crucially, wine, a luxury the nomadic Massagetæ rarely consumed. It was an exquisitely baited trap, which Cyrus seized upon, perhaps assuming the enemy had fled in panic. Within this camp, he stationed a significant portion of his army under his trusted commander, General Harpagus. Under night's protective shroud, the Massagetæ returned with devastating precision, descending upon the intoxicated and unprepared Persian forces. The ensuing battle was swift and merciless. Among the fallen was Spargapises Sonarus's son and a respected Massagetæ commander. Historical accounts differ regarding his final moments. Some sources claim he was captured alive and, upon realizing his imprisonment, requested death and ultimately took his own life. Others maintain he perished during the fierce combat. All accounts converge on what followed. When Tamiris received the devastating news, something within her simultaneously shattered and transformed into unyielding resolve. Her grief erupted like a volcano, but her rage became the stuff of legend. She dispatched another message to Cyrus, no longer a warning, but a solemn vow. "You may be insatiable for blood," she proclaimed, "but I swear I will quench that thirst." She pledged to drench the earth with Persian blood, and her vengeance would resound through history. Cyrus had claimed her son's life. He had violated her sovereign territory. Now he would face not merely the queen of the Massagetæ, but a bereaved mother, transformed by grief into an instrument of retribution, the final visage he would witness in this world. What followed would not be merely combat, but divine judgment. The sun ascended over the vast plains, like a gleaming blade, sharp and dazzling. Tamiris stood before her assembled warriors, no longer simply a monarch, but wrath incarnate. Her fighters, hardened by their nomadic existence, adorned their faces with ash and fury. This confrontation had transcended politics and territory. It had become a reckoning written in blood. Cyrus, mighty though he was, fatally underestimated the Massagetæ. He expected to face what he had conquered before: disorganized tribal warriors who would scatter before his disciplined forces. But Tamiris was no ordinary leader. Raised among warriors, she understood battle not as chaotic rage, but as calculated fury. she assembled her forces for a decisive confrontation with the Persian invaders, this time holding nothing back, though the exact location of their final clash has vanished into the vastness of the steppe. What remains clear is that Tomyris orchestrated a devastating counteroffensive. Her cavalry thundered across the plains like a storm of steel, loosing arrows with deadly precision, then closing with battle axes, fighting with the terrible resolve of those who have everything to avenge and nothing to lose. The Persians, veterans of countless campaigns, masters of disciplined warfare, found themselves overwhelmed by an onslaught they hadn't anticipated. Tomyris led from the front, her presence transforming her warriors from mere fighters into instruments of retribution. Every arrow they loosed, every axe they swung was propelled by grief and righteous anger, each blow an answer to her son's death. Many fell where they stood, others fled into the merciless expanse of the steppe, only to be hunted down like prey. And there, amid the chaos of battle, fell Cyrus, the great conqueror of Babylon, subjugator of Lydia, and architect of the mightiest empire the world had yet known. His end came on Tomyris's terms, whether by combat or execution accounts differ. What followed, however, has been seared into historical memory. According to Herodotus, Tomyris located Cyrus's body amid the battlefield carnage, commanded his head severed, and in a final, horrifying act of symbolic vengeance, plunged it into a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she pronounced, "of the blood you so thirsted for." Whether literal truth or poetic embellishment matters little. The message echoes through the centuries. Tomyris would not be conquered, not by man nor empire. When silence finally descended upon the blood-soaked plains, Tomyris stood triumphant, a warrior queen who had accomplished what no other force had managed. She had brought Cyrus the Great to his final reckoning. News of the catastrophic defeat reverberated throughout the ancient world. The Achaemenid Empire, previously deemed invincible, had been humbled by a steppe queen and her nomadic warriors. Persian chroniclers attempted to minimize the significance of the defeat, but the death of their founder king could not be obscured. Though Cyrus's remains were eventually returned and entombed with royal honors at Pasargadae, the shadow of his defeat would forever darken his otherwise luminous legacy. For Tomyris and her people, the victory transcended mere revenge. It was a declaration of sovereign defiance. They had defended their freedom not merely with weapons, but with unyielding spirit. Tomyris had confronted history's most powerful monarch and emerged not just alive, but victorious. And then, as mysteriously as she had risen to prominence, she vanished from the historical record. No accounts survive of her later years, her death, or her succession. It's as if, having exacted her vengeance, she simply rode back into the endless horizon, allowing the winds of the steppe to carry her legend forward through time. Through subsequent centuries, historians, poets, and storytellers would attempt to fill the silences in her story, transforming her into something more than merely human. To the Persians, her name became a bitter memory. To the Greeks, she embodied a compelling paradox, a barbarian queen who demonstrated greater nobility than many so-called civilized monarchs. And to the peoples of Central Asia, Tomyris became something approaching myth, a spectral queen, eternally riding through the grasslands, unbowed and unbroken, her sword still gleaming with imperial blood. Her story would inspire countless artistic interpretations across diverse cultures. Medieval illuminators depicted her in gleaming armor. Renaissance masters portrayed her towering over Cyrus's fallen form. In each era, she was reimagined according to the needs of the time, as avenging mother, as untamed sovereign, as lesson in imperial hubris, or as embodiment of feminine power. Yet one truth remains constant beneath the layers of legend. She altered the course of history. Tamiris didn't inherit her authority. She forged it through fire and determination. And for one brilliant, unforgettable moment, this queen of the steppes demonstrated that not all empires ascend some shatter beneath. The hooves of warriors who ride with vengeance burning in their hearts. The echoes of Tamiris's story reach us through the veil of time, not through her own people's chronicles. For the misogyny left behind, no stone inscriptions or royal annals, but through the eloquent prose of Herodotus, history's first great storyteller, writing a century after these events unfolded. The Greek historian immortalized Tamiris in his monumental histories, painting her as a warrior queen of unparalleled determination and fearsome retribution. Yet Herodotus was no mere recorder of facts. He was a master weaver of narratives that blended historical truth with moral instruction. To Herodotus and his Greek audience, Tamiris embodied the perfect counterbalance to imperial hubris. The great Cyrus, whose shadow had fallen across half the known world, met his end not at the hands of another mighty king or vast imperial army, but through the vengeance of a woman fighting for something far more primal than glory, her child. Her triumph bordered on the mythological, and Herodotus rendered it accordingly. With vivid detail, he described her macabre revenge. Cyrus's severed head plunged into a wineskin, brimming with blood, accompanied by her haunting proclamation, "Drink your fill." But how much truth lies beneath this dramatic tableau? Contemporary scholars remain divided. Some contend that Herodotus embellished or possibly fabricated elements of the narrative, wielding Tamiris as a literary instrument to humble the Persian Empire, still a formidable presence during his lifetime. Others maintain that while the blood-soaked wineskin might represent poetic symbolism, the central historical fact, Cyrus meeting his demise at Tamiris's command, likely occurred as described. We must also reckon with Herodotus's cultural perspective. Despite his remarkable insights, he inevitably viewed foreign cultures through the prism of Greek understanding. He portrayed the misogyny as wild yet honorably an exotic reflection of Greek ideals of nobility and freedom. Within this framework, Tamiris transcended her barbarian status to become a moral counterforce to Persian imperialism. Yet even as historical precision may have blurred across the centuries, Herodotus achieved something profound. He ensured Tamiris would transcend historical obscurity. Through his narrative, she ascended into the realm of legend, where factual precision may diminish, but resonance intensifies. In that liminal space between myth and historical record, Tamiris found a peculiar form of immortality. In an age dominated by kings and empire builders, Herodotus bequeathed to posterity a queen who stood defiant, leaving her enemies sprawled in bloodied dust. Though she vanquished one of antiquity's most revered emperors, Tamiris never established an empire of her own. She erected no stone cities, nor inscribed royal decrees on golden tablets. The Misogytae were nomads who lived not confined by walls, but attuned to the eternal rhythms of the steppe, the endless sky, and their beloved horses. Consequently, Tamiris's legacy was never formalized into institutions. No sculptors carved her likeness in marble busts. No royal mints struck coins bearing her profile. No scribes filled archives with her proclamations. Instead, her narrative persisted, as all tales do, among the steppe peoples. through stories told around flickering fires, through songs carried on the wind, through reverent whispers among warriors. The Masajati represented just one of many formidable nomadic confederations of the Central Asian steppes. Their cultural kin included the Scythians, the Saka, and the Dayhal, masterful mounted archers who traversed the vast expanses between the Caspian Sea and ancient China's frontiers. These nomadic peoples struck terror into the hearts of settled empires through their lightning mobility, unpredictable tactics, and battlefield ferocity. Tamiris, as a female sovereign among such peoples, was uncommon but not without precedent. Unlike many sedentary civilizations, steppe cultures afforded women considerably broader freedoms. Women rode alongside men, hunted game, engaged in combat, and occasionally rose to leadership. Among the related Scythians, archaeological excavations have unearthed the graves of female warriors interred with weapons, armor, and equestrian equipment, tangible evidence confirming that tales of fierce queens of the steppe were grounded in historical reality rather than mere legend. Tamiris embodied this tradition's zenith. Her authority stemmed not from bloodline or divine right, but from earned respect, unwavering determination, and extraordinary capability. Among the fractured clans of the steppe, she emerged as a binding force, simultaneously political strategist and battlefield commander, in a world where survival demanded superior horsemanship, unerring archery, and fearless resolve. Yet because the Masajate constructed no monuments, Tamiris transformed into a spectral sovereign, her legacy preserved only in foreign chronicles and through the whispered stories carried on steppe winds. Persian scribes regarded her with cautious dread. Greek historians viewed her with fascination, and to her own people she likely persisted as a revered memory woven into bloodlines and battle hymns, a phantom rider galloping eternally across their ancestral plains. While stone empires rise only to crumble into dust, the narratives of the steppe endure like whispers on the wind, and Tamiris, fierce, grief-stricken, yet unvanquished, became their resonant voice. As centuries unfurled, the imperial powers that once encircled the Masajate territories ascended and collapsed. Cyrus's heirs constructed magnificent Persepolis, clashed with Alexander the Great, and gradually faded into historical footnotes. Yet Tamiris's legend persisted, not within royal chambers, but in the hearts of those who refused subjugation. Throughout Central Asia, she transcended mere queenship to become an embodiment of feminine strength, resistance against oppression, and the indomitable spirit of the steppe peoples. Tamiris personified a defiance that surpassed geographical boundaries. Neither Roman, Greek, nor Persian, her narrative belonged to no established empire, rendering her simultaneously dangerous and inspirational. Within the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers periodically referenced her name, transformed by linguistic evolution, yet never completely forgotten. Some accounts praised her righteous vengeance and sense of justice. Others portrayed her as a formidable, savage queen, a powerful reminder that feminine authority could manifest as both magnificent and terrifying. During the Renaissance, European artists rediscovered her narrative through Herodotus's writings. Painters portrayed her in magnificent armor, triumphant over Cyrus's fallen form. One particularly dramatic composition depicts her hoisting his severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-drenched and victorious. Though theatrically rendered, these representations carried political significance. These artists were captivated by the concept of a woman who didn't merely survive within a masculine domain, she conquered it. By the 19th and 20th centuries, Tomiris emerged as a nationalist symbol across regions, including Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and scholars reclaimed her as their historical heroine, evidence that Central Asian identity was rooted in fierce independence, pride, and profound feminine strength. Her name adorned textbooks, inspired statues, and featured in military ceremonies. The queen who once commanded on horseback with bow in hand now rode again through cultural memory and mythology, through revolutionary spirit and national pride. In a world still grappling with concepts of female authority, Tomiris remains provocative. She was neither flawless, saintly, nor domesticated. She demonstrated decisiveness, employed brutality when circumstances demanded, and reserved compassion solely for the deserving. She personified resistance incarnate, wearing imperial blood on her hands like a crown she bore unapologetically. History typically favors monument builders, lawgivers, and kings who inscribe their names in stone. Tomiris accomplished none of these things. She established no empire, left no palace for archaeologists to unearth, no royal seal to decipher. Yet her name endures, not because she ruled eternally, but because she refused historical erasure. She stands as a contradiction to history's typical portrayal of women, not as supporters or marginalized figures, but as architects of destiny. Tomiris never pleaded for recognition. She claimed it through bloodshed and fury. She never rode behind a king's shadow. She confronted one directly and prevailed. Her story echoes in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not merely because she vanquished Cyrus the Great, but because she dared challenge him. She defended not an empire, but freedom itself, a freedom that galloped on horseback, hunted with falcons, slumbered beneath constellations, a freedom that defied cartographic constraints. Today, her statues rise in Kazakhstan's urban centers. Her visage graces currencies and educational texts. For contemporary Central Asians, she represents a maternal figure of nations, connecting them to their pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic heritage, a powerful reminder that their identity originated not in submission, but in battle cries and thundering hoofbeats. In a world fractured by power, gender, and the selective memories of history, Tomiris stands as a radiant beacon, not merely because she vanquished a legendary king, but because she embodied a profound truth. Dignity isn't bestowed as a gift, but seized through courage. Her legacy teaches us that leadership sometimes manifests as a mother's grief transformed into righteous vengeance, refusing to let her son's killer escape justice. We ponder why certain names echo through millennia, while countless others fade into oblivion. Tomiris endures because she was utterly unforgettable in an era when women were expected to dissolve into the shadows of men's tents. She emerged with blade glinting in hand, fury blazing in heart, and etched her narrative into history's very flesh. While mighty empires crumble and magnificent statues erode to dust, legends continue their eternal ride. Somewhere in the whispers carried on steppe winds, this unconquerable queen still gallops unbroken, undefeated, and immortalized in our collective memory. Long before digital encryption and electronic surveillance, humanity grappled with a far simpler security concern: protecting possessions from curious neighbors, wandering animals, and determined thieves. As nomadic bands settled into permanent civilizations, Accumulated belongings brought new challenges, jealousy, theft, and the fundamental need for security. This instinct to safeguard what we value runs ancient and primal through our evolutionary history. Once our ancestors began storing harvests, implements, or sacred artifacts in permanent structures, they confronted an essential question. How does one protect valuables when perpetual vigilance proves impossible? Their ingenious solution: create mechanisms that would stand guard in their absence. The earliest documented mechanical security innovation emerged in ancient Ukan, Egypt, approximately 4,000 years ago. What truly astonishes isn't merely the existence of these ancient locks, but that their fundamental principles continue in today's security systems. The Egyptian wooden pin lock represented a masterpiece of early engineering ingenuity. Its design featured a wooden bolt containing precisely positioned holes filled with wooden pegs. When inserted, the correct key, typically a substantial wooden implement with corresponding pins, lifted these pegs, allowing the bolt to slide freely. Upon removing the key, gravity naturally returned the pins to their secured position, effectively sealing the entrance. These weren't mere curiosities, but practical tools, securing storage chambers, sacred tombs, and imposing temple gateways, installed vertically and often concealed on door interiors to prevent tampering. These mechanisms may appear rudimentary by contemporary standards, yet their brilliance resided in their underlying logic. They transcended simple barriers to become intricate puzzles that challenged uninvited visitors, puzzles that required specific knowledge to solve. These ancient locks reveal profound insights about their creators. Beyond merely fearing theft, these early engineers anticipated it. They planned strategically. They invested precious resources and craftsmanship to protect what they valued most, thereby establishing the foundation for security, an entire domain of human innovation that continues evolving today. So when you secure your home tonight, recognize that you're not simply engaging a modern mechanism. You're participating in a tradition initiated by ancient hands, driven by an eternal truth. Certain things deserve our most vigilant protection. The Egyptian wooden pin lock represents more than history's first documented locking mechanism. It stands as the ancestral prototype for virtually every pin tumbler system used today, elegant in simplicity, yet remarkably effective. For centuries, it safeguarded temples, dwellings, and storerooms throughout ancient Egypt, all originating from a humble combination of wooden components, ingenious design, and humanity's fundamental desire for privacy. Picture this: an ancient Egyptian doorway, not hinged like our modern doors, but a sturdy plank barrier standing vertically. On its inner face rests an ingenious wooden bolt that slides horizontally to secure the entrance. This isn't just any simple bolt. Bedded within it are several precisely drilled holes, each housing a wooden peg that drops perfectly into matching slots cut into the doorframe, effectively locking the bolt in place. Without the right key, this door remains an impenetrable mystery. Here's where the ancient magic unfolds. The key itself, substantial wooden implement, reminiscent of today's toothbrush features, carefully positioned pegs that mirror those inside the bolt. When inserted, these key pegs push upward against the bolt's internal pegs, lifting them just enough to clear the frame's slots. With this perfect alignment achieved, the bolt slides effortlessly, granting passage. The moment the key withdraws, gravity reclaims its role. The pegs descend back into their slots, securing the door once more. It's a dance of pure mechanical poetry, requiring no springs or gears, merely wood, gravitational force, and human brilliance. What rendered this system truly remarkable was its elegant balance of simplicity and security, craftable from readily available materials, yet virtually impossible to breach without the correct key. These locks represented ancient engineering at its finest, since each lock emerged unique from the hands of its carver. No two keys were interchangeably your lock was distinctly, irrevocably yours. Contrary to what you might expect, these sophisticated pin locks weren't exclusive to pharaohs and nobility. Archaeological discoveries at sites spanning Nineveh and later Persian and Assyrian settlements reveal how widely this technology proliferated throughout ancient civilizations. Though Egypt may claim credit for the innovation, the concept traveled far beyond the Nile's banks. These locks transcended mere functionality to embody profound symbolic significance. In sacred tombs and temple chambers, a lock wasn't simply a physical barrier, but a powerful statement of reverence and finality, a declaration that certain spaces should remain inviolate unless accessed by those deemed worthy of possession of the key. Security in ancient Egypt wasn't merely practical, it was deeply ceremonial, a material expression of sacred boundaries. While Egypt gifted humanity with history's earliest mechanical locks, Mesopotamia pioneered an entirely different security paradigm that prioritized identity over mechanics. Between the legendary Tigris and Euphrates rivers, security wasn't maintained through bolts and tumblers, but manifested through clay impressions carrying symbols, authority, and trust. The diverse peoples of Mesopotamia's Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians developed an ingenious method of securing possessions, not by physically locking them away, but by making unauthorized access unmistakably evident. Their solution: cylinder seals, exquisitely carved stone rollers bearing unique images or inscriptions that were impressed into wet clay used to seal containers, doorways, and official documents. Consider it an ancient predecessor to today's signatures, wax seals, and barcodes combined into one brilliant system. Once pressed into the clay, these seals created distinctive patterns virtually impossible to replicate. Any tampering immediately revealed itself. The fractured clay became an irrefutable witness to intrusion. This approach represented both elegant simplicity and profound insight. In an era without padlocks or security systems, Mesopotamians focused on deterrence through visibility. Their seals didn't prevent access. They ensured that unauthorized access would be immediately apparent to all. These cylinder seals became prized possessions of high-ranking officials, merchants, and religious leaders, often becoming cherished heirlooms passed through generations. So integral were these objects to identity and status that many individuals were entombed with their seals, vital tools for navigating even the afterlife. Mesopotamian security extended beyond clay impressions. Temple treasuries and grain storehouses were frequently secured with elaborate rope bindings that could only be breached by cutting, often featuring complex knots or seals that would clearly indicate tampering. The underlying principle remained consistent: make the fear of discovery more powerful than the temptation of theft. This revolutionary concept of security as accountability, connecting access to personal identity and social standing, would resonate throughout millennia. Even in our digital age of usernames, signatures, and audit logs, we echo these ancient principles. In Mesopotamia, protecting valuables wasn't about concealment. It was about publicly declaring rightful ownership and access. As the ancient Greek city-states flourished in wealth and complexity, their security needs evolved accordingly. From temple treasuries to private residences filled with precious coins, Greeks confronted the eternal dilemma: how to protect possessions when constant vigilance proves impossible. Interestingly, Greeks developed mechanical locks later than their Egyptian and Mesopotamian counterparts. Instead, they relied heavily on social trust, community norms, and physical barriers, occasionally supplemented with surprisingly clever if somewhat rudimentary security devices. Among Greece's ingenious contributions was the bar and pin lock, primarily used for securing doors and valuable chests. Picture this elegant yet simple mechanism: a horizontal wooden bar positioned across a door's interior, featuring a strategically placed hole from outside. A specially crafted keyoften, a substantial iron rod shaped like an F or P, could be inserted through this aperture to lift the bar and grant access. These keys were far from subtle. Some measured nearly the length of a forearm, their very size announcing to all that the bearer protected something of value. Greek locks transcended mere functionality to become powerful cultural symbols. To be entrusted with a key was to receive authority and responsibility in equal measure. In Homer's immortal Odyssey, we find Penelope holding the key to Odysseus's treasured storeroom, not simply guarding possessions, but wielding domestic power in her husband's absence. Despite their symbolic importance, Greek locks suffered practical limitations. Their crude construction made them vulnerable to determined force, relying more on imposing size than sophisticated design. The true genius of Greek security lay not in mechanical innovation, but in layered protection. Valuable temples and state treasuries employed multiple safeguards, chambers sealed with wax and intricately knotted rope, requiring several key-bearing officials to simultaneously authorize access to sacred treasures. Even private dwellings reflected this philosophy of defensive depth. Homes featured deliberate architectural barriers with restricted entry points, inner courtyards, and gates that could be swiftly barred from within. The wealthy supplemented these passive defenses with vigilant slaves or hired sentinels, adding watchful eyes to compensate for the relatively rudimentary locks. While Greeks celebrated Medisat, quintessentially Hellenic quality of cunning intelligence, they hadn't yet channeled this brilliance into advanced lockmaking, as would later civilizations. Nevertheless, they established lasting cultural foundations: keys as potent status symbols, access rights built upon earned trust, and security conceptualized as a delicate equilibrium between physical strength and social covenant. If Egypt bequeathed us the pinlock concept and Greece wove security into social fabric, it was Rome that transformed lockmaking into sophisticated craftsmanship through metallurgical mastery, obsessive order, and administrative genius. Romans revolutionized ancient security with unprecedented precision, portability, and innovation concepts that resonate in our locks even today. Abandoning wood for superior bronze and iron, Roman artisans created mechanisms with remarkable durability and intricate miniaturization, unimaginable to their predecessors. They embraced the Egyptian pin tumbler principle, but refined it beyond recognition. Smaller, more precise, and often completely reimagined. Roman locksmiths perfected the warded lock-in ingenious device, featuring internal obstacles or wards that permitted rotation only when matched with a precisely configured key. This clever design thwarted simple picking attempts. A proper key needed to navigate the lock's interior labyrinth with exact precision. These keys were marvels of metallurgy, crafted from durable iron or elegant bronze, with meticulous attention to detail. The versatility of Roman keys reflected their sophisticated society, ranging from imposing staff-like instruments that secured monumental city gates to exquisitely crafted ring keys worn as functional jewelry. These miniature ring keys embodied Roman pragmatism, offering constant access to personal lockboxes or cabinets without the inconvenience of carrying cumbersome tools. Each was a perfect marriage of status, symbol, and practical tool. Metallurgical artistry serving daily security needs. Perhaps most impressive were Roman puzzle locks, mechanical masterpieces, concealed within ornate boxes where incorrect manipulation didn't merely fail, but actively engaged counter-mechanisms that further secured the lock. These sophisticated devices protected not only valuables, but also sensitive documents, religious artifacts, and in the treacherous arena of Roman politics occasionally deadly poisons. Their complexity reflected the heightened stakes of security in an empire where knowledge and secrets were as valuable as gold. Romans institutionalized security on an unprecedented scale. From bustling banks to vital granaries, merchant inventories to military supplies, locks became ubiquitous throughout Roman infrastructure. Doors featured reinforced metal plates, gates incorporated substantial locking bars, and even human property was controlled through locked collars, with keys held exclusively by masters. In Roman society, locks transcended mere utility to become powerful statements of ownership, authority, and exclusion, embodying the revolutionary concept that civilization required. Not just protective walls, but comprehensive security systems. While Western civilizations forged increasingly complex metal mechanisms, ancient China charted a different course, harmonizing practical necessity with philosophical elegance. Chinese engineers, renowned for their pragmatic brilliance, developed locking systems characterized by simplicity, durability, and profound symbolism, where a lock's design conveyed meaning beyond its protective function. The quintessential ancient Chinese lock was the sliding bolt mechanism, typically crafted from bronze or iron. These ingenious devices consisted of a hollow metal housing containing a sliding bolt secured by spring-loaded tumblers. When the correct key, usually a flat, carefully ridged metal implement, was inserted, the tumblers would perfectly align, allowing the bolt to slide freely and the lock to release. This principle should sound remarkably familiar. The core mechanism behind today's pin tumbler locks existed in Han Dynasty China as early as 200 BCE, centuries before similar technology would appear elsewhere. Unlike their Roman counterparts, with prominent keyholes and decorative embellishments, Chinese locks embraced understated elegance, compact, discreet, and inherently portable. Whether securing treasure chests, garden gates, jewelry collections, or private chambers, these locks emphasized functional effectiveness over ostentatious display. Yet Chinese locks transcended mere mechanical utility to become potent cultural symbols. Artisans frequently cast them in animal forms: fierce tigers, powerful dragons, long-lived turtles, or adorned them with inscriptions invoking prosperity, protection, or abundance. A fish-shaped lock securing a money chest wasn't merely decorative, but symbolically attracted wealth. A dragon-emblazoned door lock served as both physical barrier and spiritual guardian, warning potential intruders that powerful forces protected what lay beyond. Locks played particularly significant roles in Chinese matrimonial traditions. Love locks ceremonially secured symbolic chests representing the couple's shared future, with the formal exchange of keys embodying the profound trust and commitment underpinning marriage. These rituals transformed mechanical objects into powerful metaphors for human relationships. Chinese puzzle locks represented particular ingenuity, designed specifically to confuse would-be thieves with hidden mechanisms, false keyholes, or sequences of movements required for access. Their brilliance lay not necessarily in being impenetrable, but in creating crucial delay. In ancient societies, where immediacy often determined success or failure, a lock that consumed precious minutes of a thief's time could be as effective as an impregnable barrier. Ultimately, Chinese security philosophy wasn't founded on absolute denial of access, but rather on harmonious balance between practical utility, rich symbolism, and clever design. Through this elegant synthesis of form and function, Chinese artisans established an enduring legacy that continues to influence both mechanical security and symbolic rituals to this day. In ancient India, security transcended brute force deterrence to embrace clever concealment, symbolic barriers, and layered protection, a sophisticated blend of spiritual wisdom and practical ingenuity. Indian locks weren't designed merely to exclude. They were crafted to confuse, misdirect, and warn, often incorporating hidden latches, false compartments, and symbolic inscriptions that elevated security from mundane protection to philosophical practice. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of Indian lockmaking was the masterful use of deception. Puzzle locks and trick mechanisms became ubiquitous in protecting temple treasuries and valuable chests, not necessarily to render forcible entry impossible, but to make unauthorized access sufficiently complex to discourage all but the most determined. Some required precise, sequential manipulation. Press a concealed button here, twist a particular lever there, and only then would the key mechanism engage. Others featured misleading decoy keyholes, serving no purpose except to bewilder the uninitiated. Temple security represented the pinnacle of this layered approach. These sacred spaces housed precious offerings of gold, irreplaceable texts, and venerated relics. Rather than relying solely on locked doors, temple guardians implemented security in both physical and ritual dimensions. Storage chambers might be secured with specially formulated wax seals, mathematically precise knotted ropes, and clay emblems imprinted with sacred symbols, each layer carrying profound spiritual significance. To violate such seals wasn't merely theft, but sacrilegious offense against both earthly and divine order. The locks themselves often bore exquisite religious imagery, majestic elephants symbolizing wisdom, delicate lotus blossoms representing purity, powerful deities, and protective mantras rendered in precise calligraphy. These weren't merely decorative elements, but spiritual armor, designed to intimidate the superstitious and impart sacred protection to the secured object. To touch such a lock without proper authority constituted, in many traditions, a direct affront to divine powers. Within Indian royal courts and merchant caravans, specialized portable locks secured precious scrolls, trade goods, and private chambers, typically crafted from durable iron or radiant brass. These locks balanced lightweight portability with robust security. Key designs achieved remarkable individualities, sometimes so uniquely crafted that a single master artisan would create both lock and matching key, ensuring absolute security through their singular knowledge of the mechanism's secrets. As in other Asian cultures, locks frequently played ceremonial roles in marriage traditions and inheritance rites. The formal unlocking of a sealed family chest represented not merely access to material inheritance, but the solemn transfer of trust, ancestral legacy, and filial responsibility across generations. For ancient India, the ideal lock transcended mere physical barrier to become a multidimensional guardian. It puzzled the mind, protected the precious, and whispered its timeless message: only the rightful may pass. As ancient civilizations flourished and trade networks expanded from Rome's marble forums to China's bustling markets, security faced unprecedented challenges. No longer could protection remain stationary. It needed to travel alongside valuable goods. Whether safeguarding a merchant's precious silks, traversing the perilous Silk Road, or protecting a military commander's strategic plans during campaign, locks needed to do more than secure temples and palaces. They needed to become companions on dangerous journeys. The ingenious solution: compact, resilient locks designed to resist tampering under the harshest conditions. Roman merchants relied on remarkably advanced iron padlocks to secure traveling chests, valuable saddlebags, and temporary warehouse facilities. These sophisticated devices featured spring-loaded internal mechanisms paired with specialized ring keys, robust enough to withstand determined attempts at forced entry yet sufficiently lightweight for practical travel. Archaeological discoveries have unearthed these locks from misty British settlements to sun-baked Syrian outposts, sometimes preserved in shipwrecks or buried in ruins. Their widespread presence across such vast territories testifies to a universal concern that transcended cultural boundaries: the protection of mobile wealth. Chinese traders and imperial officials employed portable sliding bolt locks, predominantly crafted from enduring bronze, to secure traveling chests and valuable transport carts. Many displayed remarkable camouflage appearing merely decorative or seamlessly integrated within the container itself, while bearing distinctive engravings indicating ownership and authority. Such marks served dual purposes: deterring theft through clear identification, while ensuring that any tampering would be immediately evident and legally actionable as both criminal violation and profound dishonor. Nomadic peoples traversing Central Asia's windswept steppes developed remarkably practical hybrid systems, combining leather bindings with metal security components. Ingenious arrangements of metal rings and specialized latches could be rapidly secured over tent entrances, valuable horse equipment, and weapon containers. While less mechanically complex than urban counterparts, these systems prioritized speed and immediate visual confirmation. A returning traveler could instantly determine whether their possessions had been disturbed during absence. On ancient battlefields, security took on life or death significance. Locks protected crucial weapon caches, treasury wagons carrying soldiers' pay, and command tents housing strategic plans. In warfare, controlling access wasn't merely about physical resources, but critical information. Military documents and tactical maps were frequently sealed within locked containers, requiring multiple keys held by different officers, an astonishingly early implementation of what modern security experts would recognize as multi-factor authentication. Across diverse cultures spanning 3 continents, one principle remained constant: as the ancient world became increasingly interconnected through trade and conquest, security innovation accelerated to meet emerging threats. The road offered unprecedented opportunity, but equally significant risk. And ancient travelers met these challenges armed not only with weapons, but with increasingly sophisticated key-silent guardians of civilization's expanding horizons. When we casually turn a key in a modern lock or tap an access code into a digital interface, we rarely contemplate the remarkable legacy behind these everyday actions. Yet each satisfying click, each secure latch, each authorized access represents another chapter in a story that began amid the desert sands surrounding Egyptian temples, continued through bustling Roman workshops, and spread along the ancient trade routes that gradually connected previously isolated civilizations. The heritage of ancient locks transcends mere mechanical innovation to reflect profound psychological truths about human nature. These early security devices illuminate something quintessentially human: our fundamental need to protect, to establish boundaries, to define what belongs to us alone. Whether manifested as a hand-carved wooden bolt in ancient Thebes, a precisely crafted ring key in Pompey's wealthy neighborhoods, or an intricate puzzle lock in China's imperial Chang'an, the underlying principle remained constant, creating a threshold that only authorized individuals could legitimately cross. Through millennia of development, these physical boundaries evolved into powerful symbols reaching far beyond practical security. A lock securing a temple sanctuary didn't merely protect material treasure, it preserved sacred boundaries between mortal and divine realms. A seal affixed to an official document didn't simply prevent unauthorized reading, it embodied the authority of the state itself. Even in our modern world, we intuitively recognize these symbolic dimensions. A locked diary protects intimate thoughts. A ceremonial wedding chest safeguards meaningful treasures. A bank vault secures not just currency, but financial trust. Though today's mechanisms employ advanced technologies, their symbolic meaning remains remarkably consistent with their ancient predecessors. Perhaps most striking is how little the fundamental principles of security have changed across thousands of years. Today's sophisticated pin tumbler locks still reflect core concepts pioneered by Egyptian artisans. Modern digital security measures, from tamper-evident packaging to blockchain verification, echo ancient innovations. Personal authentication, evidence of interference, and symbolic access control transformed for a digital age. Yet ancient security harbored a profound philosophical insight that remains equally relevant today. No lock, ancient or modern, has ever been truly impregnable. The most sophisticated mechanisms could be picked, broken, or circumvented by sufficiently determined adversaries. The true power of locks has always resided not merely in physical denial of access, but in the declaration of boundaries. Each lock proclaims to the world, "This belongs to someone. You are not authorized to enter." This psychological threshold, more than any mechanical component, represents the enduring essence of security across human history. From ancient tombs to bustling trade routes, from sacred temples to humble dwellings, locks have always represented more than mere theft prevention. They embody our fundamental concepts of control, identity, privacy, and occasionally survival itself. So the next time you hear a deadbolt slide into place or a digital lock acknowledge your credential, pause to appreciate that you're not simply operating a security device. You're participating in a narrative thread woven by pharaohs and emperors, merchants and warriors, priests and artisans, entrusting a small piece of ingenious technology to maintain the boundaries between what is theirs and the wider world beyond. And with that, dear listeners, our culinary journey through the Wild West saloons comes to a close. Like the weathered hardtack that sustained countless cowboys, our tale has been hearty, if not always appetizing, as you drift toward slumber. Imagine yourself far from those frontier establishments with their questionable aromas and mysterious stews. May your dreams be sweeter than cornbread, fresh from the skillet, more comforting than a bowl of beans on a cold prairie night, and considerably more pleasant than discovering unidentified meat in your stew. Unlike those frontier diners who had to remain vigilant even during meals, you can surrender completely to peaceful rest. Sleep well, dear listener, free from the sounds of saloon pianos and the aroma of salt pork, until our next historical journey. May your slumber be deep and undisturbed by thoughts of weevil-infested hardtack or coffee strong enough to dissolve spoons. Good night.